Sapphire 2026.5 is out, and I'm always super excited with every new release of Sapphire because with the new tools, I get more toys to play with inside of Sapphire Effect Builder. And this is one of the looks that I created. It's called Tech Tunnel. So what I'd like to do in this short tutorial is just walk you through some tips and tricks in how to get the most out of this look. So first of all, let's load the preset by clicking on Load Preset. And I'm going to type in Tunnel. There we go, Tech Tunnel, and click Load. And now click on Edit Effect to open up the Effect Builder. All right, so as far as presets go, this is not the biggest I've ever created, but there are a few nodes. So let's just break this down. It's going to roll in a little bit here and here as well. So this is connected to the source, but the first node under the source is GradientRadial. And I've got previous selected nodes selected. So that's going to cover whatever the source is because this is designed to be a background. So it will cover the source. And you can see also that in GradientRadial under Combine, I've got Grad only selected. Notice also here with GradientRadial that most of the parameters are turned off. The only two are inner color and brightness. They're the host parameters. And inner color is green. If you click on the stopwatch, you can see that that is a driver. That's why that's green. And that's actually driving the color for grid. We'll look at that in a moment. So that's the base color. Next is parallax strips, just to give this a sort of geometric look. Sort of divides this up into geometric strips. And mode is set to manual. This will be automatic by default, which actually has animation, which you could have if you wanted to, but I didn't want for this look. So I left that on manual. And you can adjust the amount by sliding the manual amount. Okay, we'll look at these parameters in the host in a moment. You can see there's only two for this as well, including seed. Now to break that up even further, I've used tile scramble. And we'll look at those parameters in the host in a moment. Okay, next is grid. And gives us a nice sort of techie grid feel. See color is red here. And if we click on the chain link here, you can see that this has been set to be a driver. That's why it's red. And I've chosen GradientRadial inner color from the list. There's only one here, inner color. So if I change the color on GradientRadial, it's going to change the color on the grid. Just close that up. Now that's going into the background port of Sapphire layer. So that's everything in the background. And in the foreground, we have the new tool, dots. Okay. Now notice this doesn't say S_dots. This is not a standalone effect. This is a tool in Sapphire Effect Builder. And you'll find this down here under the tools, dots, okay? Now it does have its own presets though, which you can browse here inside the Effect Builder. So if you want to take a look at those presets, you can click on Load Preset. And there's a few presets in here, give you some idea about how this can be used. And I've actually used the LED dots to create the base for this look. As far as the settings go, I've got a few that are selected to be visible in the host. And the key things here are flicker. See if I just drag through here, you can see that these are flickering. Gives us that nice sort of retro LED look. And I've actually matted it out using the strip slide effect. If I just adjust the amount here, you can see how these strips are sliding on? And I've got the order set to random. So what this is doing is it's matting out the dots. And if we take a look at that in the foreground of S layer, we have these strips of dots. If I come back to dot map and just change the seed, you can see how that randomly changes where the strips are. Of course, I can increase the amount of strips if I want to. It's fairly flexible. If I come back to here, you can see now the dots are in a different place. We'll have a look at how that works, how effective that is when we look at the host parameters. Okay, so there's dots feeding to the foreground of layer, along with the other effects in the background. Now to create the circular shape, I've used Sapphire WarpPolar. Very nice. Of course, WarpPolar does have a seam, but because we have this geometric look, the seam is basically hidden. There's the seam down there, which is something I really like. And you'll also notice how center is red. We'll talk about that in a moment. Next is InfiniteZoom. And this is what gives us that tunnel look. Now, by default, there's no animation other than the flickering of the dots of the LED lights. But what we're going to do in a minute is set a few keyframes for zoom, and that will give us the fly-through effect as if we're moving down the tunnel. Next is advanced defocus. And advanced defocus is a brand new effect in Sapphire 2026.5. I've only used the very, very basics here. If you want to learn more about this terrific new effect, definitely check out the specific tutorial for that. Suffice to say that I've only got defocus width available in the host and brightness. But notice I am using a mask for it. Here, I'm using the Sapphire Wipe Rings effect. And if I change the frequency, you can see how we've got rings there? I just use this as a way to get some fake depth of field. You can see we've got an outer ring here and this inner dot, this inner ring. And by feeding that into the mask port, you can see how we've got some defocus on the outside and some in the distance. If I just go and change the amount of defocus width, that becomes really obvious like that, right? So it was just really just a way to fake depth of field. And something I'll point out, if we click on it, notice how there's a yellow triangle. I've talked about this in tutorials before. This is because I've exhausted the amount of host parameters that I can view. And when you have a lot of nodes, this becomes a challenge for you. So you have to think of ways to get around that. One way is to use parameter linking, which is a very effective way. You can see how center is red here. And even though this is not available in the host, this is being controlled by the center of InfiniteZoom, this zoom center. So even though I can't view it in the host parameters, I can still actually control it. So that's one way to get around the limited host parameters. But let's just say you wanted to decrease the depth of field, to make it narrower. What we can do is we can play with the wipe percentage. See, I can drop that down. And now if we take a look at advanced defocus, see how we're getting less here? If we just come back and turn off previous selected and adjust that again, bring that down, and we get narrower and narrower depth of field. And it's not real depth of field, it's just a fake, but I think it's fairly effective. But just keep in mind again that because this is not available in the host, you can't change this from inside the host, so you'd have to do it here inside the effect builder. I'm just going to undo that. Come back to where we were. All right, so that's advanced defocus. Next we have shape. This is giving this little sort of black sort of darkness in the distance, this little black dot. And again, you can see that center is red. That's connected to InfiniteZoom center. If you ever want to sort of work out what's connected to what, just take a look at these parameter links. And that'll give you a quick heads up as to what's linked to what and what's driving what, okay? And the last is Ultra Glow. So Ultra Glow I've covered in many tutorials before. It's my favorite glow. And that's what's giving us this nice hot glows on these LED lights, these dots. So let's take a look quickly back here at InfiniteZoom and Zoom Center. Now, I wanted to give you a way to be able to move the center point of this tunnel, to move it around the screen. And I thought the best way to do that would be to move the InfiniteZoom. So if I say shift that to the left, you can see how I can move everything. But what I want you to notice, if I move it too far, notice how we're starting to get these sort of diagonal lines. This is because WarpPolar, if we just previous selected node, WarpPolar, as we saw, is linked using parameter linking, and it's starting to be cut off at the edge. And that's what's introducing those strange lines. So if you wanted to move your tunnel, let's just move it a little bit more like that. What you'd have to do is come into WarpPolar and just adjust the outer radius. Just bring that in away from the edge of the comp, and that should fix it. That fixes it, okay? So I was trying to think of different ways to move this around the screen and not break anything. And I thought this was the best possible way. But if you think of a better way to do it, please let me know. All right, so that's the basics. I'm just going to undo, and let's go into the host and take a look at the host parameters. Now, in my opinion, as with all Sapphire Effect presets, the best way to get started with them is to check out the host parameters. And that's because, as you saw, with multiple effects in some of these presets, there's hundreds of parameters. And what we've done is we've just focused on the key parameters that make the biggest changes, that make this the most flexible, and made those available in the host. So definitely start with these parameters, okay? And if you need to adjust anything that isn't available in the host, go into the builder and do it there. So let's just quickly walk through these. So we've got GradientRadial. We've already seen that we've got inner color and brightness. So if I didn't want any of the blue, I could just take brightness down to 0, and that gives me black, which is quite a good look. And of course, I can change the color. So, if I wanted to make it warmer, I could just make it red. And remember, that grid is linked to that, so that changes the color of the grid as well. Next is the dots matte. And remember, this is using strip slide. So first thing to sort of try here would be the amount. And here, if I decrease the amount, that gives me more lights because it gives me more strips. And if I increase it, it gives me the opposite, it gives me less lights. So I could basically turn them off by making the amount 1. Strip angle's interesting. I just put that in there because it's changing the angle of those strips, which is, it's acting as a matte. So it's sort of cutting the strips at different angles, which, I don't know, gives you a more sort of random look, more organic look, which I thought was quite nice. And there's also, of course, seed. So if you wanted to have a different random seed for those random strips, you just adjust that. And if you want to add any more parameters to the dots matte, of course, go into the builder and turn on the host parameters. Next is dots, of course. It's all pretty self-explanatory. I won't go into this. You can play around with those. Parallax strips, just the basics, mainly the seed. Just try different looks. Seed is always a really good parameter to include in the host parameters because it gives you an easy, quick way to create variations. Tile scramble. This has got a few more parameters because I wanted to give you the ability to add more tiles. To make it look more complex. You can see if I really bring up tile amount, you get a lot more tiles. And also doing things like bringing the tile rel width down to 0 adds more detail like that, which looks really interesting. So definitely play with those. Grid, if you want to get rid of the grid, just bring grid opacity down to 0. No more grid. And I also put in latitude here. There is like the roll and the tilt as well, but they basically kind of did the same thing, but I thought latitude was enough. Just check this out. If I change that, it can give you some quite interesting looks. Taking that down to a negative value just changes the way that grid looks. I thought that is quite nice to add a little bit of interest to the grid. So definitely play with that. And also the tele lens width. If I increase that, I can add more grids, and if I decrease it, I can sort of slide the grids back in and just have a little bit of grid, okay? Of course, infinite zoom. We'll add a few keyframes for zoom in a moment. We've already seen what zoom center can do, and I've given you a rotate option in there as well, okay? You can rotate that. Advanced defocus, we've already seen. And shape, if you wanted to have more darkness, you could just increase the size of the shape like that. Ooh, that looks a bit spooky. And of course, the amount of blur as well. So if you take blur down to 0, you'll get a hard edge, which is not so great. But if you sort of make that a bit bigger and just brought the blur down, you can fine tune. Quite nice. Looks like a portal. And last but not least is ultra glow. Okay, just a few parameters there. Decreasing the threshold will give you a lot of glow. And we're going to set a few keyframes for zoom in just a moment, but I just wanted to point out, and I'm sure I've mentioned this in tutorials before, that before you set keyframes, it's best to go into the builder and make any changes you want to make there, because sometimes, depending on what you do in builder, you can remove your keyframes. And what I want to do inside of the builder is add a couple of effects to enhance this a little bit. So once again, I'm going to load up Sapphire Effect Builder. And one thing you can do to make this look a little grittier is use Grunge. So if I just give myself a little bit of space here, just select GradientRadial, press the Tab key, type in Grunge. I'm going to add Grunge in there. That's going to cover up everything. But if I just bring the stamp opacity down a little bit, like that, take a look at this. Turn off previous selected node. Now we have like sort of grungy panels, gives it a little bit of texture in there. And of course, in Grunge, you can go in and load a preset and just choose the kind of grunge you want. Maybe you want more scratches or flowers. You want some flowers in your tunnel. Lots of options in there, loads of options in Grunge just to add a little bit of detail in there. So that looks pretty nice. And something else we can do, just to add a bit more animation in here, once again, I'm going to give myself a bit more space. Click on the tile scramble node, hit Tab again, type in digital damage. So add in digital damage. You can already see what's going on there. I might just bring the intensity down a little bit. Don't want too much. Let's go back into the host. So what we'll do now is just set a few keyframes before we do a preview for zoom. So I'm just going to find the zoom. That's InfiniteZoom zoom. And just add a couple of keyframes for that. Just zoom in a bit. And now we've got a little bit of grunge on the panels of the tunnel. We've also got a little bit of digital damage flashing, adding some interest. And I've just thrown the Sapphire logo in there with a few keyframes on the Z, just to finish off the look. So hopefully that's been useful for you. As you can see, with Sapphire Effect presets, you can use them just as they are. You can go into the builder and make quite dramatic modifications, add effects and make adjustments there, or just tweak the host parameters just to dial in the look that you want. To learn more about Sapphire and Sapphire Effect Builder, visit borisfx.com, where you can also download a trial version. For now, this is John. See you in the next tutorial.